I guess Laura will mute them as she lets them in if they're not muted, or I'll check on that too. Okay, it is 1 o'clock. You hear me fine, Carrie, on your end?
I can.
Okay, good. I will go ahead and get us started here. We may have a few folks coming in, and we've got somebody working that end of a program here, so they will let folks in as they show up in the waiting room. But I'll introduce this presentation that we're going to have today. I'd like to welcome you all to our Panhandle Outdoor Live webinar series. My name is Eric Lovestrand. I work as an extension director over in Franklin County in the Mid-Panhandle region, and I will be introducing our coastal sustainability agent, Carrie Stevenson, who works out of our Escambia County Extension office over in the western side of the Panhandle. Carrie is going to be talking to us today on the topic of bats, beneficial and misunderstood animals. So she's got some good information for us here. There are a lot of myths around bats and a lot of fears around bats that are unwarranted. So we're excited to have her do this presentation today. I'll give you a few housekeeping details before we jump in here. And I wanted to make sure that everybody knew that this session will be recorded and it will be available at a later time through our Panhandle Outdoors website and listed in a couple of other locations. I'll get information about that in the chat box. And we're also going to have you folks, if you're interested in asking any questions today, type those into the chat box so we can address those as we go through or at the end of the presentation. We're also going to put a few useful links in the presentation with more information about bats as we go through different times when these topics come up. And at the end of the presentation, we have a very short 2-question poll that we will launch, and we would appreciate you guys just taking a couple of minutes to provide some information there that will be useful to us. And our next webinar in the series is actually going to be coming up on October 21st on the topic of seasonal seafood. And our presenter will be an agent that works out of the Santa Rosa County Extension Office. Her name is Chris Verlinde. So Chris will be talking to us on October 21st, and we'll put that date and information in the chat as well as we go here. So if there's not any other information I need to put out here at the beginning, we will go ahead and turn this over to Carrie so she can take us through some great information about bats.
All right. Thank you, Eric, and good afternoon, everybody joining us on our Panhandle Outdoors Live Online webinar series. I like speaking about bats in October because for the most part, that's when the average citizen thinks about them the most. They're in all of the Halloween decorations, they're in stores and on TV and all around. And so it's one of those times when they come across the consciousness of a lot of people. But in reality, they live here year round, and they are doing things for us all of the time, providing a lot of benefits. But because of their association with Halloween and scary stories and folklore, they're pretty misunderstood animals. Our only flying mammals are pretty incredible, but a lot of people are afraid of them. And so one of my favorite things to do is to talk about bats and try and change those perceptions and educate people about them. I got interested in bats probably 10, 12 years ago when I was part of a grant-funded project to build a large bat house, and you'll see pictures of that later. So I'm hoping my slides will change. Anybody seeing a slide shift yet? There we go. Okay, so first, the myths. Somebody type in the chat room, if you would, a myth you've heard or a story you've heard about bats. What do people say about them? I'll give you a couple minutes. Just so you know, this is a vampire bat. You can see from its teeth, they're pretty sharp. It's got these large ears. Most bats have large ears to capture sound from echolocation. They have unusual noses many times, the same thing to capture that echolocation. All right, so we got a couple of things. This first one, they carry rabies. Laura says they get stuck in your hair. Eric says bats are blind. We've all heard somebody say you're blind as a bat, that they bite you. So let's look. So, contrary to popular belief, there are no bats native to the United States that drink blood. There are 3 species of vampire bats. They all live in South America. They've not ever seen any records of any coming here. I'll explain a little more about how they feed, but I can assure you that it's not nearly as dramatic as in the vampire movies. They don't attack your neck and suck your blood and turn you into a vampire. But it is kind of interesting how they feed, and they do feed on blood. But they're not here in the United States, and we're in Florida. All right. Okay. The rabies concern. Only 0.5% of bats carry rabies. Transmission to humans is extremely rare. More likely to get it from a dog, from a raccoon, from some other wild animal that we're all a little more used to. While bats can carry rabies and it could be an issue, what you want to do is avoid a bat that's behaving irregularly. If a bat is on the ground instead of flying, or if it's flying during the daytime, then it's probably sick and you want to avoid it. So you never want to pick up a bat if you don't know what's going on with it. I say that I have picked one up to rescue it, but that was only because we saw it injure itself. But you want to be really careful. You would, if you have one somewhere, you would want to keep people away from it. And you can report it to the local wildlife facility or wildlife control. Hoping. All right. The other one, the hair thing. Everybody's worried they're going to get stuck in your hair. It's pretty unlikely. I've heard people say that they flew with their heads, but most likely it's just going after an insect that's nearby. If you think about it, in large open areas, bats are able to hone in on a really, really small insect with echolocation. And so if they're avoiding things like branches and trees and other obstacles in the air, then it's unlikely they're going to go after your head. So that's probably not a concern. They can actually see really, really well, but they don't see as well in the dark, just like we don't see that well in the dark. So they do use echolocation, where they emit high-pitched sounds that bounce off the things in the air, and they come back and they capture that noise with their ears and their noses, and their brains interpret that into a picture in the dark. So, but they are a very crucial part of our food web. So those are those bat myths. We'll keep going. So the real story is that there's a lot of habitat destruction that has caused their populations to drop significantly throughout the United States and around the world. Some of it's on purpose. People are afraid of them, and so they'll block off caves, they'll block off man-made structures where the bats are roosting. Sometimes it's incidental, it's clearing of forests for development, removal of trees, even, you know, accidentally, or in natural disasters like the hurricane we just had. So the fewer trees we have, the fewer man-made structures we have, the less habitat we have for them. Now, one of the biggest issues that has come about in the last 10 years is something called white nose syndrome. And that's a fungal disease that affects bats. You can see in this picture here on the right, there's some bats roosting in a cave, and they've got what looks to be little white fuzzy things around their noses. That's not natural. That's not part of its coloration. That's actually a fungus that's growing on the nose and nostrils of bats. And what happens is it started kind of in the Northeast. I'll show you a map in just a minute, but it affected hibernating populations of bats. And what happens was they would have this fungus come in, it would spread through the population of bats. And the fungus was not necessarily killing the bats, but what happened was that they would be irritated, just like if you had something growing on your face, it would probably bother you and it would wake them out of their hibernation. They would go outside in the winter, fly around, there's no food, and they would die of starvation and cold. There's a big effort among bat researchers and wildlife managers and folks all over the country to combat this. They're looking at creating vaccines. They're looking at finding ways to prevent its spread. There are populations of bats in Europe that are not that don't succumb to the fungus caused by white nose syndrome, and so they're studying that. But they're really beneficial. We'll talk more about that. This little symbol down here on the bottom left is called a Wu-Fu symbol. This is a Chinese good luck symbol. You see, this is a circle of 5 bats. So just like we use a 4-leaf clover, a horseshoe in the States to denote good luck, bats are considered good luck in China. And you'll see those things around. This is a map created by the White Nose Syndrome Response Team. You can see it started really the oldest, the beginning diagnosis of white nose syndrome was in central New York State. It spread from there and has been moving outwards to the north and south. The closest it's gotten to us, you can see, is kind of south east Mississippi here. There are a number of counties in North Alabama. Again, there are a lot of caves in some of these areas through the Appalachians, so there are large groups of hibernating bats. Possibly our heat and our lack of need to hibernate has protected our bats, but you can see them in South Texas down here, so that may not be the case. But they're working on a resolution, but it's not out there yet. All right. Okay, so some things on insect reduction. Everybody knows they'll eat mosquitoes, and that's one of the best things about them. But they also eat a lot of crop pests, moths and things that become the primary caterpillar that attacks crops. So here you've got a Texas study that found 100 million bats ate 4 billion insects nightly. If you compare that to the amount of pesticide you would have to use without bats, it would be 20 to 40 acres, $20 to $40 per acre of savings. So that's a huge thing. Bill here, I don't want to pronounce your last name wrong, asked if white nose syndrome affects all species in the U.S. I don't believe so, because there are a number of solitary dwelling bats that don't live in large groups. So I'm thinking more of the large colony roosting bats, some of the freetails, some of the evening bats. I'm not sure which species it's affected most directly, but I can find that out. And probably this website right here could tell you a little more on some of the studies they've done. Some of the other benefits besides eating harmful insects, protecting our crops, protecting our communities from mosquito-borne disease, is that they disperse seeds. Their bats eat in a lot of other ways besides eating insects. Many of them eat fruit. Many of them are pollinators, like hummingbirds or bees. And so the nifty thing about those seed dispersing is when they eat tropical fruit and they can't digest the seeds, and they drop them out on their guano. So you have new fruit growing up in the forest floor that's already been fertilized by the guano that they come in with. You can purchase bat guano as fertilizer. It's probably been composted to get any kind of pathogens out. Large amounts of bat guano can become problematic if some of the pathogens are released into the air. I think it's schistomiasis. Don't quote me on that, but that's pretty rare that we would have that kind of buildup of guano in one place in our area. That's something you might look at in large caves and things like that. But guano is an excellent fertilizer. So there's a lot of ways that bats eat. The insectivores eat moths, flies, and mosquitoes, and they're the ones that you're going to see here. Every bat native to the United States is an insectivore, except we sometimes have a visitor in South Florida, the Jamaican fruit bat, that will eat fruit. So everything that you're going to see around here is trying to find bugs. You have fruit bats that are tropical species. Usually the plants co-evolve with the bats to bloom at night. Well, let's see, not for the fruit, but for the pollinators. They'll have large fruit that are visible at night, and the bats will actually just land and eat the fruit. Now your nectar and pollen eating bats will go to night blooming plants. I think this one is in the desert. And so you'll see a lot of species that have evolved to be pollinated by bats because they're active in the evening. What is fascinating to me are the piscivorous bats, the fish-eating bats. Those are typically in the tropics as well. But you can find videos of how this works. So it's like, how do they fish at night? Because they're all nocturnal species. What they'll do is these bats will cruise the rivers or the bays, and they're looking at fish activity at the surface of the water. And when the moonlight glints off the fish in the water, the bats will see that and they'll drop down and grab it, just like an osprey or an owl might with their talons. They'll grab it and they'll take it somewhere to eat it. And then blood, everybody's favorite, the vampire bats. What you're seeing here, this is a chicken foot. This is a bat, that's its tongue, and it is licking blood from the chicken. What actually happens with vampire bats, instead of them going and sucking blood out of something's neck, what they typically do is go after livestock in the evenings. They will go and usually use their talons, or not their talons, their teeth, to scrape the leg or the body of a cow or a sheep or a chicken. And as the blood starts to run down on that animal's leg, it will lick up the blood. Interestingly, blood is kind of heavy, it's sort of dense. And so a lot of times these bats will have stronger legs because they have to walk around for a little bit, waiting for the blood to digest before they can take back off and fly. It doesn't typically kill the animal that it's feeding on, and so it's not as dangerous as it seems. Some of the other cool things about bats, they have a very wide variety of sizes. The smallest bat right here at about 3 inches is the bumblebee bat, about the size of a bumblebee or a honeybee. And then the largest bat, this guy is a flying fox. You can see he's probably 4 feet tall compared to the man here. The wing stretch on this guy is 6 feet at least. These both live in tropical areas, and might be in the Middle East, and in Indonesia, in North Africa, Central America. Some of these are all fruit-eating bats. I think this one on the right, it looks like it's got a mouthful of banana, actually. But they are fruit eaters, so if you see something giant in the air, if you're vacationing in Thailand, don't worry, it's not going to pick you up unless you're holding some fruit. Some other kind of interesting things on bat anatomy. Their order is Chiroptera, which means hand wing. And you can see here that their wings, this is the skeleton of a bat. This is a skeleton by comparison of a chicken. But the bat, you can see these really interesting modified hips that allow it to hang upside down. The wing bones are its entire hand. That's its pink. Would be the thumb, second finger, middle finger, ring finger, pinky. And so a bat's wings are essentially leathery skin stretched between all of those hand bones. So that's how they work. That's how they fly. The wings are about as thick as your eyelid. So if you touch that, you can kind of feel about how thick it is. And again, they glide. They're only flying, they don't just glide, they fly. Some other kind of neat things, the newest bat species discovered was about 7 or 8 years ago in South Sudan. It's called the panda bat. Really incredible coloration, really neat little species. There's a wide variety of bat colors and shapes and sizes, and I'll have more pictures of that. So first off, a little quiz. Of these options, you can put these in the chat. You can just kind of say it to yourself. How many kinds of bats do you think live in Florida? Any guesses? A, okay. So one person says a couple of species. Give her. Oh, I answered. I moved forward too quickly. 13 bat species in Florida. So we don't have just 2. We've got 13 that are native to our area and some that are probably visitors, but these are the regular. 48 is the number of bat species in the United States. So we have almost as many bats as we have states here. And then 1,400 is the number of bat species in the world. When I first started giving talks like this, there were about 1,250 bat species in the world. They've discovered another 150 since that time. So it's pretty incredible. They're hidden in these jungles. Some of them are small populations, but there's a wide variety, a lot of biodiversity in the bat world. Let's see. So what do they look like? So these are a few that live in Florida. And I'll just put these pictures up so you can see the differences. Again, a lot of times people think of bats as sort of these leathery, kind of slick looking, maybe mice with wings. But they actually have very mammalian, dog-like faces. Some of them might even remind you of, again, flying fox looks a little like a fox, but you can see the coloration there. I would venture to say some of these guys are pretty cute, but you may differ. Again, some of you may say are faces only a mother could love, but again, the large ears you can see for all of them. Some of them have modified noses, lots of different colors of fur, depending on where they live and what they do. Here's just even more diversity. Central Africa, these are different species up close from that region of the world. So you can see really the large ears, the odd modifications to help them thrive in their own environment. One of the most well-known species is the Brazilian free-tailed bat. Again, it's called Brazilian, but it lives all the way up through the North America. These are colony roosting bats. One of the caves in Texas has 30 million of them living in there, and every night it takes several hours for them to leave. This is what a Brazilian free-tailed bat looks like up close. When it says free-tailed, that's one of the differences, ways that researchers tell them apart. They'll have a tail that extends beyond their rear end, basically. And other bats, their tail just kind of, it's not separated. It's kind of like a hanging earlobe versus an attached one. But that can be used in like a rudder as they're flying. As Pat posted here, the link to the University of Florida bat houses, these were bats on the UF campus in Gainesville. There was a large population that was living under one of the state sports facilities, causing problems when they had evening games. They'd come out to feed as they're, tossing balls around the field. And so the university, being a wildlife friendly place, built these large bat house. This one on the right was the first one, I think, and they've built these other barns since. This is a really neat thing to do if you're ever in Gainesville, ever traveling through Central Florida and have a few minutes to stop at dusk. You can go, there's a large fence around this whole facility. People line up, they'll bring a picnic and wait. And when the sun starts to go down, the bats start leaving the bat houses. And it's a tremendous thing to watch. There's 450 to 500,000 bats living among these three. It takes about 30 minutes for them all to leave, but they just fill the sky with, flying animals. And they go across to Lake Alice and feed. There are also some really enterprising hawks that wait for them. And I have seen a bat get snagged by a predator that knew there would be bats coming. But it's a really interesting kind of free Florida thing to do if you're ever in the area. A couple just of our natives, just to kind of show you a little more about them. The southeastern bat is kind of small. It's, 3-4 inches tall, I think. It's got really woolly fur that's variegated. It's brown and white and gray. Typically lives in hollow trees, not necessarily in man-made structures. The big brown bat is one of the bigger ones. It does like structure, so you might find this in an attic or a barn, in the underpass of a bridge. In Texas, in Austin, Texas, downtown is another great place to watch bats. They have a big festival every year, but they have several 100,000 bats leave there every day, and that's in the middle of the city of downtown Austin. Anyway, the big brown bat is a cool one. The evening bat, I see these periodically. It's kind of the classic bat with the really brown fur and the kind of more leathery wings and ears. These are common in the area. This is our only endangered species of bat, the gray bat. It lives in some caves not too far from here, but these have low numbers, so they're protected. So bat houses. So we have a couple of large bat houses in the area. This one on the left was an Eagle Scout project at the Roy Hyatt Environmental Center in Cantonment in Escambia County. The one on the right is the one I helped build at the 4-H property in Escambia County. It was at our old property, and then it was relocated to our new property. We do not have large populations of bats in them yet. There's not any real magical way to lure them there, but we're waiting and hoping that they will use the facilities, so to speak. This is what it looks like inside. If you look straight up in any of these bat houses, this is what it would look like on the inside of the ones at University of Florida. These are really where they're, these little sections and nooks are where the bats would land and crawl up in. They could go anywhere in here, but these little modules were built specifically to allow bats to go in there. This one could house about 50,000 bats if they so chose to move in. And it's not too much different than your own bat house. I get a lot of people ask me how to build one. We've done workshops periodically with youth and with adults. For North Florida, if you're watching from North Florida, there has been a little research on how to paint them to keep them appropriately, make them appropriate housing for a bat. Medium brown or light gray are best for North Florida. South Florida, you want lighter colors. This is mostly about heat retention. You want to reflect the heat away in South Florida, and you want to maintain a little bit heat in North Florida because it can get cold when they're roosting. These bat houses are typically used as maternal roosting colony areas. They're mostly going to be used by females in the spring as a safe place to keep their babies. On the right here, you see a photo. This is looking on the underside. You want about a 3/4 inch wide. Bats are really small. They can get into some really tiny crevices. You want to be careful of wasps. They will come in and build nests in your bat house. So if you have one or you want to build one, keep an eye on it because if there's too many wasps, the bats might avoid it. I won't spend a long time on this because we're running out of time, but single chamber houses, best place to put them is on a side of a building so that they stay warm and you don't have a lot of temperature fluctuation. You can build multi-chamber houses and put them back to back. You can put them up on a pole. The higher you put them, the better. Trees can be too much shadowing, and they can also be a source of predators. You want to put them at least 12 feet above the ground, away from light because you want the dark for nocturnal species. Metal siding can be too cold. These are some good spots. You want to put a bat house within a 1/4 mile of some fresh water, and that might mean your swimming pool, so that's okay too. I've seen them drink from mine. A mix of habitat types gives you a lot of diverse food sources, and especially if you know that bats are already living in buildings, especially if you're excluding bats from a building and you are trying to get rid of them from an attic or a barn and you want to put a new alternative place for them to live, that's a great idea too. Again, you don't want to put them up in the middle of a forested area. You want to get on about 20 feet from the edge of a forest so that you don't have, again, like that hawk that I see in Gainesville. It's okay for a hawk to eat a couple out of a 500,000 bats here and there, but if you've got a smaller population, it can wipe one out pretty quickly if a bird learns that there are bats living right there. Bat houses are going to be typically used by one of these 3 species around here. So these are the ones you might find living in man-made structures. And finally, wrapping up, the Bat Conservation International is one of the worldwide leaders in bat conservation and protection and education. Obviously, for the same reason, it's Halloween in October, and so the end of October is considered Bat Week. They have a lot of really neat information. If you go to this website or just Google BatCon or Bat Week, there's a lot of expert speakers, researchers, folks involved in bat conservation all over the world who are speaking on that week, and there's a lot of awareness stuff that'll be on their social media. So if you're interested in bats or want to learn more about them, this is a really good way to do that. So I encourage you to visit their website. And finally, that's it. That's my little intro to bats. If you have any questions, let me know. We probably have a little poll here on the chat group. You can probably see there that we've posted some plans for how to build bat houses yourself. We do have a wildlife specialist with University of Florida who is got her PhD in bats. I've learned just about everything I know from her. It's Dr. Holly Ober. Do they hibernate in the Tampa area? I don't think so, David, but I think they're pretty much active year round. And once you get kind of south of mid Alabama, but let me find out for sure. Let's see. Do I know any restrictions for placing them in residential yards? I've never heard of any neighborhood associations that had any problems with bat houses. Usually if you can have a bird house in a neighborhood, there's no reason you couldn't have a bat house. I have heard people who are concerned about keeping bees around while they're keeping bats. Would that be a conflict? But from what I can tell, it's not, because the bees are going to be active during the day, the bats are going to be active at night, and so they're both going to kind of fill their own niches and not interfere with each other. Endangered species in Jefferson County area. Jefferson County might be an area where you have some of those gray bats. I'm not sure specifically if the gray bats are in that area, but they've got to be pretty close because it's in north central Florida. Not sure if they're living in the Florida Caverns area or if it's in some of the other natural areas. But if you have any, it would probably be the gray bat. All right. Any other questions? David, glad to hear y'all built a house. I hope you find some bats moving in sometime soon.
Okay, I'm not seeing any additional questions right now. I just wanted to say thank you to everyone that participated in the presentation today, and thank Carrie for sharing her information and knowledge of bats. It's really a very cool kind of animal to have, and people learn a lot when they sit in on a presentation like this. So looks like we've had 12 participate in the poll. That's pretty good. We'll leave it up for just another minute or so. If you haven't filled that out, take a second to do that, please. And I'd like to make sure and invite you to our next webinar on the topic of seasonal seafood, October 21, with our extension agent, Ms. Christopher Lindy. Anything else, Carrie, that you want to share, or any questions pop up? I don't see any right here at the end.
Yeah, feel free to call or email me. That's down there at the bottom if you're interested in, if you have any other questions that pop into mind, or you want to, get bat house plans, you didn't grab those or whatever. And tell your neighbors, I've tried to change a lot of minds on bats, and if they're freaking out about them, point them out, go look at them at sunset, watch them flying around. They're just really great fun to watch. Kids love to watch them flying, and just remember that they're helping us out a lot. But I appreciate y'all and your time, and thank you very much for participating. It's been fun.
Okay, we're going to go ahead and close out the webinar, and the hosts will stay on for a little while just to wrap up.
All right. Happy Bat Week.
Another successful venture.
Can someone stop the recording? I don't know who can do that. Then I have